Well, hello everyone. Thank you for having us here. I'm Ramonna, that's Jim, in case you were confused at all. Matt asked us to come up here and really talk to you about beyond cat videos and what might be interesting to your users on Facebook. So we want to really dig in here. I'm going to ask a few questions just so we can see who's in the room. Share some facts and figures about Facebook. As Matt said, it's kind of the overall platform that is most generally used by swim clubs and by your different audiences. And then talk a little bit more specifically about Facebook, kind of what's the purpose as you look at that among other platforms, who are the audiences you're trying to reach, share some tips on content strategy so you can really bolster your following, talk about success metrics. A lot of people have questions around how do you measure it, and so we want to help you kind of dive in there. And then share some inspiration from some other just best practices that we've seen. So as Matt explained it to us, they're trying to get some of this on YouTube, so they want to try to keep presentation at the beginning and Q&A at the end, but believe me, we left lots of time for Q&A, so hopefully we can answer a lot of your specific questions as we go. So as far as who's in the room, how many people operate a swim club? Okay, how many coaches? Awesome. How many folks from other NGBs? Great. And then who did I miss? Who are you? Is that everybody? Okay. For the swim coaches in the room, I was probably the kid that drove you crazy because I signed up every year so I could practice with my friends. And then once meet season started, I quit because I don't like the feeling of being chased. So I apologize for that. I was a gymnast instead, everything on my own. But I have a lot of respect for swimming. And as Matt said, we've worked a lot with USA Swimming and with the Make a Splash program. And so we're excited to be here. So let's dig in to Facebook. So just some facts and figures for you guys to be aware of. There's more than 950 million Facebook users now, so there are lots of people on there every single day. And down at the bottom, you can see some of the stats of how frequently content is getting uploaded. It is getting older. People ask us that a lot, and the demographics are rising. I saw another stat after I put this together that for the first time, over half of senior adults age 65 and up are on Facebook. And so I think that's probably keeping an eye out on grandkids type of stuff, but they're on there, and the demographics are kind of rising for Facebook. It's still roughly 50-50, a few more females on there now. And then you can see that with among 18 to 24-year-olds especially, they hop out of bed and onto Facebook to see what's going on in their world. So it's definitely still a very prevalent social media property, even though you hear a lot of other things on the rise. So this is, and you'll see this in our Twitter presentation as well, but this is really when we think about social media, how we set up different properties. So first thing we talk about is what is the purpose of this platform, so in this case Facebook, and then really think about what's the tone of voice, who are we trying to talk to, what does success look like, and then just setting ahead of time the frequency of posts. So if you know ahead of time that every week you want to try to get 3 Facebook posts out, you can start thinking about that on Saturday and Sunday for the next week rather than every day of the week wondering, should I be posting on Facebook today? What should I be posting? Am I doing a good job? So really kind of thinking about those things in advance we find is a key to success across all social platforms, but we'll talk specifically about Facebook here. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. So when we talk about purpose and audience, I think this is the most important thing. When Matt came to us, he mentioned that a lot of the swim clubs that exist out there are posting and doing a very good job of keeping up with tactical information, such as when your meets are occurring, when your practices are occurring, and it's a good use of Facebook, obviously. But then how do we encourage you and how do we give you the tools to expand your content beyond just logistical information about your meets and practices and that type of thing? And when we look strategically with our clients at a platform like Facebook, we always ask the end question first, which is what do you hope to accomplish? What is the purpose of that platform? And if it is just to get information out, that's great, but the idea is obviously to get more ongoing engagement and interaction with not only your swimmers, but their parents and potential parents that have kids that are going to be coming up through the ranks of your swim clubs and that type of thing. So we ask this question first and just say, is it just logistical information, or are we really trying to promote events? Are there opportunities to engage with alumni? Are there things that, if you own a club or if you're a coach, are there things where your swimmers have gone on to swim collegiately and you want to get them back into the fold and show people their successes and that type of thing? And so asking that question of who your audience is and what the purpose of your page is or what you want to accomplish first is an important first step, because that will guide then your content plans and what type of of information that you're putting out there. It'll also help you stay a little bit more organized. I know oftentimes we get the question, how do I stay on top of posting? You know, every Monday I sit there and I go, what am I going to post to Facebook this week? When you have an idea of who your audience is and what that purpose is, that'll help you then formulate a little bit better throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year, what your content looks like, and hopefully plan ahead so that you don't have to, you know, rack your brain every Monday morning on what you're going to post to Facebook.
As you guys look at this list on screen, are there other uses that you guys are using Facebook for? Again, we were just kind of brainstorming.
So the right forum is another great question with Facebook. Of course, there's a number of different aspects of Facebook that you can throw out there. You could have a business page for your club, for your practice. But you can also have a group page internally at our office. We actually have a GroundFloor Media group so that we can communicate internally about things that doesn't add to our email inboxes, which is always appreciated. So if somebody's having a birthday, if somebody's having an offsite meeting, if there's something going on where clients are coming into our office, we'll circulate that via a group, which is a closed group for just our employees. So there are those considerations of whether you should set up a page, which is more public, and people can join, become a fan of your swim club or what have you, or you could create a group for, say, all of your coaches, all of your volunteers, what have you, so that you could have more internal discussions that isn't open to the public and use Facebook in that way because people are active. I read a stat, I think yesterday or the day before, that the average person spends 40 minutes a day on Facebook, and they check it 14 times a day. So when you think about those stats and how long, you know, back when we all used to read newspapers, probably read a newspaper in about 30 minutes, right? Maybe 45 minutes, but people are spending about that same amount of time on average on Facebook. So lots of time spent there, and considering whether or not you should start a group where you might have discussions there rather than email or rather than something on your website, it could be a good consideration. Also just wanted to give a head nod to privacy considerations and consent forms. Should you be using photos of your swimmers, your athletes, you might want to consider, especially if they're under the age of 18, some type of consent form. I'm sure that some of you have that at the beginning of the year from a standpoint of setting up the season and that type of thing, but it's a consideration on social media as well. We have a couple of employees whose husbands are district attorneys, and they work in the gang unit, and so they've really locked down their Facebook page from a standpoint of what people can see and that type of thing, and so they're very, very, very keen on not having photos of their children on Facebook. So
and us not tagging them.
And us not tagging them in photos and that type of thing. So those are all considerations when you're using Facebook to help promote your club, to promote your swimmers. Just be sure that you understand, you know, at the get-go, ahead of time, what the wishes of your parents and your swimmers are.
So I think a lot of people get stressed out about social media in general, about content. What am I going to post on all of these things? And we really like to, again, as I said, think about what you're using each one for. And when we think about Facebook, and you'll hear these different ones as you hear from Scott about Instagram and us on Twitter later, there's definitely, they've evolved now. It's not all just one thing that you can just post the same thing on every platform. Think about how you're using them and which ones you should really be on, right? You've only got so many hours in your day to deal with this as opposed to all the other things on your plate. So what makes the most sense to be on, and then how do you generate that content? So when we think about Facebook, it really is one of those more conversational platforms. It leaves room for emotion, and it's also, you know, for family and friends versus you think about a LinkedIn, which is a lot more kind of business to business, professional type of networking. Facebook seems to have more of that personal, familiar persona to it. And as far as frequency goes, we always say, do what's going to work for you. There are formulas that, you know, people might say you need to be on there 3 times a week or 4 times a week or every day. But at the end of the day, whatever is authentic to you and you have time for and you can be consistent with and maintain, that's what you should really shoot for. Now, once a month probably isn't enough, but is it 2 times a week? Is it 3 times a week? And we'll talk about some tricks here in a second to think about content and how you can make it easier to post more frequently without having to always come up with fresh content and be super witty or anything like that. So just be consistent and think about too, you guys obviously have swim seasons. What can you do in the off season to keep people, you know, kind of at least familiar with you and thinking about you, even though it's not necessarily meet season? So, so we'll give you some tips for that again. And then Responsiveness is important. Depending on what you're using it for, you're probably going to have some folks either asking questions, hopefully not, sharing negative comments or blasting you on Facebook, but it can happen. So just make sure that if you're only posting a couple times a week, somebody's at least watching the Facebook page and monitoring for mentions and making sure there's nothing just sitting out there festering that could either be a great opportunity to connect with somebody and answer their questions, or it could be something negative that if you don't get a hold of it pretty quickly, that it could start to fester and it doesn't need to. So some ideas like I talked about, if you can, don't just talk about your club, right? We have a rule that we talk about sometimes with clients, 80-20 rule of only talking about themselves about 20% of the time and talking about current events and trends and other things in the industry about 80% of the time. I don't think that's realistic for you guys, especially as clubs, to go that far. But even if you think about 50-50, 50% of the time we're talking about things that are relevant to the club, upcoming events, promoting great things that have happened, but then 50% of the time maybe, reposting information from USA Swimming or from one of your state's sports organizations, or even, USA Today had a great article about swimming and the benefits for youth and sharing links to that. So try to think about how you can broaden the content and not always be about yourselves. Providing tips is a good way to do that. And again, they could be tips that you guys come up with. They could be tips that you saw in a magazine about, ways to keep kids safe in youth sports, or nutrition tips, things like that people who are in competitive mode are thinking about, and probably that parents have a lot of questions about as well. And then I mentioned linking to articles of interest. So I imagine you guys are reading things that are relevant to the industry. As you find those, bookmark them, and when you need some content on social media, point them out to other people, because if they have the same interests as you, they're likely to find those interesting as well. And then this bottom right-hand side is what I was talking about as far as having tips to kind of think about your content on a weekly basis so you're not always having to come up with something fresh. I'm sure, is everybody here familiar with Throwback Thursdays? Someone's picked up a photo of you from your high school yearbook and posted it on Facebook, and you're really sorry that it happened, but it did. So Throwback Thursdays is one of those that you can always fall back on personally, or you can come up with, ones that work for you guys. So do you feature a swimmer once a week or once a month, and is that always on a certain day? Coaches and volunteers, I know sometimes it seems weird and maybe a little braggadocious to be talking about yourselves, but people like to hear that. So know that as familiar as all the people on your staff are to you, some of those parents and even swimmers that aren't, coached directly by them might be interested in hearing about them and their lives and just sharing some information about them. And it's great content that you have at your fingertips. There's Throwback Thursdays, of course. Inspirational Mondays. Do you come across a lot of inspirational quotes that you find interesting, and can you, always share those on Mondays so that people start to get to know that those are coming out on Mondays? It's not something that you have to invent, especially on Monday. That's probably the worst day of the week to think, what am I going to post this week? But if you have a folder of those and you can pull that out and say, okay, every Monday we're going to put an inspirational quote. Every Wednesday we're going to, feature a coach or just have a photo that people want to see. And on Fridays we're going to, share what's coming up for the weekend. So just thinking about that as kind of how can I have custom content that is standard every week so that you're not reinventing the wheel every week. Seems to work well for a lot of folks.
The beauty of the internet is that there's so much information out there as well that could be relevant to your audiences that you don't have to recreate the wheel every time, right? Use USA Swimming as a resource. Use some of the athletes that are out there that are posting technique tips for swimming techniques and that type of thing. Use that and just share it. And again, I think that goes back to your audience identification and understanding who your audience is and what the purpose of your page is to then give them the right content. If you're thinking that it's mostly your swimmers or the parents of the swimmers, then maybe technical tips on how to be a better swimmer in the pool are things you should focus on. But that should give you a sense of kind of how to create your content strategy. And then we always talk about testing and revising as we go forward. I mean, some of it is testing, and if you're really trying to get engagement and likes and shares and that type of thing, the cream will sort of rise to the top eventually. If you're sharing videos about swim techniques, oftentimes those will be the things that you see more engagement on. So post more of those and get rid of the motivational Mondays or whatever it might be that isn't getting as much engagement. We wanted to take a second and talk about organic versus paid on Facebook. This is a big discussion in our world. Facebook, ever since becoming public, has to monetize themselves, and as such, they've really put a focus on the paid side of things, especially for brands and organizations and that type of thing. There's statistics out there that show that Facebook has actually taken the prominence of brand posts off timelines. So you and I will see brand information less and less organically in our timeline, even if we follow your page. And so there are considerations. I think there's a session later to talk about Facebook advertising and get into the weeds with that later. But we did want to give a head nod to this from a sense of there is opportunity to boost posts and that type of thing, and throw a little budget, if you have budget, toward boosting posts that you might want more people to see, that might be more important. If there's a late cancellation of an event or practice or weather-related issues, you might want more people to see them. There's a boost button at the bottom right-hand corner of each one of your posts, and what it allows you to do is, if you go in and just mess with it, it won't charge you. If you just click boost, you can kind of see the fields, then the options you have to boost your post. But for $10, $15, $20, $40, you can boost that post to your followers, you can boost it to specific followers, you can boost it to only people who have certain interests in these types of things. So this is becoming more and more prominent as a means for Facebook because of the way that Facebook is serving up information organically. Something you should be aware of if you have a brand page and that type of thing.
Jump in real quick.
Yep.
So if you boost a post, it will show up in here in your feed. So as you're looking at your posts today or tomorrow, if you see a post in here and notice something at the top that says that it's boosted and it's not someone you usually follow, that's how that got there. And then ads end up over here on the side. So just so you know what the difference are, if you weren't, it's clear. And I think we always like to be the purists that think if you have great content, people are going to see it. But Facebook is just flying in the face of that these days and saying you can have the best content in the world, but you're going to do something with us to monetize it if you want people who aren't coming to your page to see it. Now, you may have a great group of folks in your club that they come to your page for all the information because that's where you need them to go and they're trained, and you may not need to do that for the purposes that you're using it for. But if you are trying to grow your audience and grow your fan base and engage some of those alumni or some potential parents that aren't necessarily needing to be on your page, that's when you'll probably want to get into boosting some posts.
And there are some ways to get around the paid side of things. Certainly, posting it out there. The algorithm is basically the more that people interact with your page, the more those people will see your posts organically. So if there are people who are going to your page and seeing it and liking and commenting and sharing, they'll probably see your information more organically than those who aren't doing that. So things like tagging people in your posts, if you're okay with that, if you feel okay with tagging your coaches, your swimmers, your athletes in posts, that's going to automatically, obviously, allow them to see the post. But there's also, without being too annoying with it, you can certainly put out the ask to the people who actually see your posts and say, hey, this is an important piece of information. Please share it with your networks too, and make that ask on the go, because then that will sort of virally share with their audiences and hopefully get out to the masses more so than an organic post would.
And just one example, and we'll share some inspiration here at the end too, but I don't want to forget this one because it's not there. Colorado Outward Bound School I've been on their board, and so I'm more familiar with how they operate. But they take pictures of kids at the summit all the time, and don't tag the kids, but they tag their parents. So ahead of time, before the kids go out on excursions, they have the parents' Facebook information, and they love to see what their kids are doing on Facebook while they're not at home. So that might be another thing to think about too, is are your parents engaged enough that they want to be tagged when their kids are at meets so that they know the information's out there.
So we get a lot of questions about metrics, and I think this goes back to what we mentioned earlier, which is asking at the get-go, what is your intended purpose of Facebook? We bucket out metrics into 3 categories. The first is exposure. That's the number of people who are seeing your posts, the number of people who like your Facebook page, this type of thing. The second is engagement, the number of people who are commenting, sharing, liking, that type of thing. And the third is action, and that's where it comes back to your organizational goal for the page. Is it just to get people information? That can be an action, and that will then relate to the number of people who you're engaging with, the number of people you're exposed to. Some clients actually that we work with are actually looking for action to get them to go from Facebook to their website, or get them to download a piece of information, or get them to share that piece of information. And so when we talk about success metrics, we always talk about identifying the action first, and then having the metrics for engagement and exposure identified accordingly that will lead to that action. With Facebook, you've got a variety of metrics that you can look at. If you own the page, it's a business page. At the top, there's a link to Insights. When you click the Insights, you'll get these types of graphs that show you how many people have engaged with your page over the past 30, 60, 90 days, your post reach, your page likes and how that has changed and where those came from, you can really glean a lot of important information about not only who's on your page, but where they're coming from and why are they, what types of posts they're liking. This may help you guide your content plan to say more people are engaging with video than anything else, so I need to be posting more videos. Or they really like information and specific results from our meets with photos of our athletes. And so you can use these metrics to kind of guide your content plan and say, this is what's resonating with the audience, and so I want to provide them more of that type of information. It even goes all the way down to posts, individual posts here. This is a client of ours that has to do with the Colorado River and restoring flows to the Colorado River. But you know, on the 22nd, we posted this post, and it got 153 people were reached, and there were 5 different likes based on that post. But as you see down here, we boosted the post. It ended up getting in front of 9,200 people. It had 575 likes and 89 comments on there. So you kind of get a sense of how effective the boost method can be as well. If you're asking people to share and you ended up getting more shares, you can glean a lot of information from the metrics that Facebook provides you.
That one was also about the basketball tournament, right? So it was current events.
Yeah. The post
we
was.
made a basketball bracket out of river flows. So.
Yeah, a little bit timely, relevant.
Current events. So then, like I said, we want to leave a lot of time for questions, but wanted to just share a couple examples. We kind of just researched and found some youth sports groups that seem to be doing a good job of kind of all that different kind of content that we talked about. So this is just Eastlake Little League, and they actually combine information that's kind of at that administrative level to articles that are of interest to parents, and then videos and images of kids playing. So you can see where they're playing to different audiences there. And then they really encourage people to engage with them, either by asking questions or taking polls, and then turning that information around on social media. So that's just kind of one example. And then another was this, I just like the name, Florida Stone Crabs Lacrosse Club. But they actually do a good job as well as have a fun name. But here you can just kind of see that they really, again, they mix that administrative information that kids need about the games in advance, health and safety, and kind of those sports trends that people are interested in, and they might look to you to become the authority on that if you're providing a lot of that information. And then they have a fun page that sends out kind of holiday greetings, memes, and communicates with fans both in English and Spanish, so they have that bilingual need, so really thinking about that too.
There's also opportunity, I'm sure you all have engaged some parents that are engaged more than other parents, and if there are some folks within your swim clubs or within your organizations who are more active than others and are actually somewhat savvy on social networks, tap into them as well. I grew up in Iowa, in a little town in Iowa, and my high school team just won the 2A state championship in wrestling. And one of the wrestling mothers, they have a group for Mediapolis, Iowa wrestling, and I'm part of the page. And one of the mothers each time would say, "Here we," when each session would start, she'd say, "Here we go," and would say, "Tag yourself," or comment on this post if you want to follow along. And what that would allow them to do is each time she would say, John Smith is up 5-3 after the second period. If you commented on that, you would get a little notification that said, obviously somebody has updated this thread. So there are options within the actual swim meets as well, and within your events as well, to tap into parents, to tap into volunteers, to get them to provide some real-time updates for you and make your page a little bit more useful for the folks that are out there.